I am so excited to be here this morning with Polly Trottenberg, the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and my good friend Gabe Klein, who's the Executive Director of the Joint Office of Transportation, of Energy and Transportation, I should say. It's, you know, when I think about, this is such an extraordinary moment we're living through in this country. If I think back 41 years ago, Ronald Reagan got on the podium outside for his inaugural address in Washington, D.C. and talked about government being not the solution, but the problem. And it seems like that's so distant now, and that we're really, we have a very activist, courageous government. It's almost a return to the Kennedy era where we have kind of the best and the brightest. Don't let that go to your head, Gabe or Polly, but in government, doing real things. At the heart of it is, of course, is the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Department of Transportation with an absolutely inspiring secretary, an incredible team. You're doing amazing things. I want to kick off with just some news that many of you may not be aware of, but just a few hours ago, President Biden signed an MOU to reduce, to aim for 100% zero emission for medium and heavy-duty trucking and buses by 2040, with a targeted floor, I think 30% new zero emission by 2030, which is just really another example of this interventionist, activist government doing very, very good things. Polly, just any quick thoughts on that?
Thanks so much, John. Good morning, and it's great to be up here with you and Gabe, and thanks, CoMotion. It is terrific to be here on behalf of an administration that I'm really proud of, the Biden-Harris administration, and as you mentioned, a wonderful secretary, Secretary Buttigieg. And you know, one thing I love about this administration, Gabe and I actually got to serve together on the Biden-Harris transition team. This is an administration that came in the door with an incredibly ambitious agenda, and they were ready to execute on day one. And I think you are seeing the fruits of that, and you are really seeing the fruits of it in the climate space.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, we are doing incredible things on the climate front. The announcement is just one of an incredible array of things that this president has done. You know, in some ways, most impressively, working with Congress, which, as we know in our political system right now, is very difficult to do. And then, as you mentioned, an incredible array of executive actions, which we've done at DOT, EPA, Department of Energy, you name it. So thank you for that great announcement. It's continuing the process of decarbonizing the transportation sector and working with our international allies. Another thing I think this administration has really started to do again to sort of bring back global partnership and global leadership on climate. So thank you. It's a great thing to celebrate.
Yeah. When for 4 years, I think the U.S. was missing in action under the previous administration.
Not only missing in action,
to call a spade
undermining in action, I would say.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, good. Now, the Joint Office, Gabe and Polly, over the last year, been very, very focused on the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure program to roll out fast charging, high-speed level 3 charging across the land. What's kind of next? Is it relationship with cities? What's so great, I mean, from my point of view, I'm a city guy. Yeah. Polly, of course, is the former Commissioner of Transportation of New York City. You're the former Commissioner of Transportation of both Chicago and then Washington, D.C. So the relationship with cities is very, very important. But what's next? I mean, you're going to focus on multimodality, relationship with cities. Give us a hint of sort of what's to come over the next few years.
Yeah. And can you hear me okay on this mic?
Yeah, just speak a little louder, yeah.
Okay. So, well, first of all, one of the things that's so exciting about the Joint Office, how many people actually know what the Joint Office is? Raise your hand. Okay.
Not bad, but I think you should explain.
Yeah. Okay, so the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation is the first time that the federal government has started an office that spans multiple agencies. So Polly is my boss, and Deputy Secretary Turk, who was around yesterday, is my boss. And it's really taking an all-of-government approach, which I think we also saw during the transition, that this is how things were going to be, that they were not going to be siloed, and that the administration was going to look holistically at these problems as much as is practical and possible. And the Joint Office very much symbolizes that. And so we're doing technical assistance and coordination. We're almost like the front door to the federal government for electrification. We work closely with OST and Federal Highways and EERE and DOE, all these acronyms. But we coordinate a lot of activities, and we're constantly evolving in terms of what's needed. So the last year, and Rachel Neeler and Al Schroeder sort of stood the office up, was really focused on the NEVI program and the $5 billion for highways, because you need a national network, right, to get over range anxiety and make people feel like electric vehicles are not just as good as an ICE-powered vehicle, but considerably better.
Yes.
But now, with the $2.5 billion in corridor and community grants, and these are discretionary grants versus formula funds, there's this opportunity to get really interesting and creative, and Polly and I have talked about this. And so, yes, shared mobility, multimodality, and I would say, more than anything, it's focusing on the outcomes for people first, right? And then figuring out how electrification, electric charging, electric vehicles fit into that. But I think we know that putting the cart before the horse and just focusing on the technology, even amazing technology like electrification in a silo, is not necessarily going to benefit the maximum number of people. And with the Justice 40 initiative, which also was very clear to us, I think, in the transition, that this was serious, right? That this is not just lip service. We really want to serve everybody, and everybody's not going to own a car, right? And so it's not necessarily a one-for-one switch as you get into urban areas. And I talked to the Blink CEO yesterday. He was adamant about this, that when we start getting into urban areas, home charging, the majority of the charging is going to be level 2 charging. You need level 3, but you don't need it everywhere for every use case.
Absolutely. Now, $2 billion here, $5 billion there. It starts to be some real money at stake here. And there are a lot of funding pots at USDOT in particular, but also now at EPA, DOE, other agencies of the federal government. So sometimes I wonder that there are cities and states who may not be able to take sort of full advantage of this. How should they be thinking about tapping these resources? Are there ways you guys can help? Is that part of the function of the joint office?
I can start and just say that in addition to working with DOT and DOE, we also are working closely with EPA on the $5 billion, actually now $6 billion for school buses, with FTA within DOT on the $5.6 billion for no-low transit. And so we're constantly having to expand our expertise. And by the way, we work with like 10 of the 17 national labs, so we have a lot of very technical expertise. We're also ramping up to figure out how to help states and municipalities and cities, reservations also. How do you think about procurement? How do you structure public-private partnerships, which was the last panel, which is very interesting.
Yes.
Because it could be that some states say, you know what, we want to buy this as a service, or we want to operate it differently as a public-private partnership. But I would defer to my esteemed colleague on all the different funding pots.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Gabe. I mean, I'll give a bigger picture answer on that. And, it was sort of discussed in the last panel a bit. I mean, DOT, we're implementing almost 50 new programs. Department of Energy, we were with our colleague yesterday, they're implementing 60. I mean, so it's an extraordinary volume of programs. And I know there was talk about, can we better harmonize them all? We would love to. We're trying to do as much of that as we can. We're combining some of our funding notices. The challenge is a lot of these programs are congressionally mandated, and they tend to have their own rules, and certain members of Congress and certain committees have proprietary interests in them. But we are trying to make it as easy as we can. We have also hired a whole technical assistance group led by wonderful Maria Zimmerman, who I'm sure a lot of folks in this room know, who's fantastic. And we are, basically we're hitting the road. We are going all over the country, targeting communities, large and small, helping people work through our requirements. And I'll just, I'll give one example. So one of our most popular discretionary grant programs is the RAISE program. And sort of left to our own devices when we drafted up our notice of funding availability, with all the legal things it needed and all the approvals, it clocked in at 90 pages. And, I sort of asked the question, is there any way we can get this down? I think we chopped it down to like 50. And this is a 5-year program, so give us a couple more years, and hopefully we'll even make it even more user-friendly. But we will not succeed if we don't see that the dollars from these programs get to communities all over the country, large and small. And we are very determined on that front.
good. I mean, that's certainly the sense that I think the secretary is driving that point home.
Right. I mean, he is a mayor of a modestly sized city, and as you say, there are a lot of us who come from city government who are in the Biden administration now, and so we're very focused on making sure we're getting out to all those communities.
By the way, I want to open this up to a couple questions at the end, so those of you who think about what you might want to ask Gabe and Polly, if I may use your first names.
Sure.
Please.
Okay. Just a question, and yesterday, of course, was the news that the Democrats had lost control of the House. How will that potentially impact what you're doing? Is that something you can go on the record about?
I don't know who wants to start. I mean, I can say that, so we have, through DOT, there's $7.5 billion worth of funding, and Polly can speak to that a little bit more, but we have $300 million of operating funding as well. That's no year money, which means, we can spend it as we need to. We've planned on the office being here for 5 years to correspond with the bill. It could be extended, we'll see. But from that standpoint, our office is solid, programmed, and funded.
Yeah, and look, the voters have spoken, and I think, the election results, disappointing from the Democratic point of view, obviously, to lose the House, but we retain the Senate, which, at least for us, means we can continue to, frankly, get important nominees confirmed, and that will be really important. We are really now in the implementation phase, and so having the right personnel and the right leadership is something we'll be able to continue. And I think, as Gabe said, I mean, the exciting news about the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act is these are multi-year bills.
Right.
The funding is in place, the program designs are in place. It will be up to us to do a good job implementing them such that they will retain broad political support, hopefully on both sides of the aisle. As was also said, obviously the president still has the ability to bring forward a very robust rulemaking agenda, and I can tell you, at least from the USDOT point of view, we are doing a lot of incredible work on rulemakings, particularly focusing on climate, but also on consumer protection and, of course, on safety. So there's a lot the executive branch can do with a divided Congress. But I also think, one of the nice things we've seen about infrastructure, even in obviously a very polarized political climate, it still remains a relatively bipartisan issue. And
True.
If we're going to do our jobs right, we're going to continue to get support on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely.
And hey, one last thing on that. I was in Tennessee Tuesday, Chattanooga. And you would think, okay, Tennessee, they might be into EVs, they might not be. There are more EVs there, like in terms of the number of EVs to ICE vehicles than I've seen almost anywhere. Chargers are everywhere and they're full. And then I had to remind myself that VW's got a plant there now. And they just announced 4 gigafactories in Tennessee, like in the last few weeks.
Absolutely.
So we also have to remember, like when we're talking about EVs, like a lot of people here are mobility nerds, like I am, or transportation nerds, or infrastructure nerds. But we're talking about reinventing the entire economy around renewable energy, an economy that basically was built on the back of fossil fuels for the last 120 years. So once the politicians, and it doesn't matter what color state it is, realize the financial, fiscal impact, the jobs impact, the quality of life impact, I think a lot of those issues are going to go out the window. Plus, we're hitting, this is a hockey stick. So I think we have 60% increase in EV sales this year over last year, 50% year over year from the year before, during the pandemic with supply chain issues, right? But then you're going to hit that hockey stick. And the infrastructure that we're putting in with the states, the states are putting it in, the private sector is going to do all that work, right? That's going to give people the security, and the OEMs and the finance industry that's nervous about utilization. All of those folks are going to fall in line. And if you think I have rose-colored glasses on, I've seen this before. It's happened before. So, people thought that cell phones weren't going to happen for 20 years, or smartphones weren't going to happen. Once it happens, it happens. And ICE vehicles are going to be a thing of the past, and they're not going to be worth anything.
Yeah. Let me ask you, sorry, Polly.
I just want to add one other little point to what Gabe said, which is, part of the legislation required all 50 states to submit an EV charging plan, and credit actually to the teams in the Joint Office and at DOT and DOE. You might say, well, certain red states, are they going to do this? Every state stepped up, and it's interesting. I was on a call sort of celebrating, by the way, it was just this week, the 1-year anniversary of the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure, and that's true in a bunch of programs at Department of Energy, Department of Interior. So you know, even as we maybe have a divided Congress, when you get to the state level, states want in on a lot of the things we're doing on infrastructure and on investment. It is bipartisan.
Well, and actually one of the best state plans, according to the people in my office, was North Dakota.
Yeah.
It was one of the best
Right,
plans.
I know, Oklahoma has been a huge leader too. So it's not, it doesn't fall evenly along the lines you might think.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we've been talking about EVs and NEVI, and the Joint Office, I think, has been sort of almost uniquely focused on sort of EV charging rollout, et cetera. What is how do you look at hydrogen, for example? And will you, Gabe, and the Joint Office be involved in hydrogen? I know there's the overall plan to set up hydrogen hubs across the country, but can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, yeah, we're focused on hydrogen. It just doesn't get as much coverage, right? But hydrogen, LNG, propane even. The goal is zero emission.
Yes.
And hydrogen, and I see Karina Ricks here, we've had conversations about this. She was at FTA, and we've talked about the appropriateness of hydrogen for certain use cases, particularly very heavy vehicles, you know, buses, over the road, because one of the issues you have, and we'll see, Tesla is bringing their semi out this week, their first delivery, but you get into a bit of an arms race where it's like, okay, the bigger the vehicle, the bigger the battery, then the bigger the battery, you know, so it becomes heavier and heavier and heavier. So I think hydrogen is definitely a component, and that's where the states are going to decide, you know, where the money needs to be spent, because we're talking about different geographies, different contexts, different economies, right?
Right. Okay. Let me just kind of shift the conversation a little bit to equity. We all talk about that a lot. But I'm just sort of wondering how the rollout of this massive new electrification system across the country addresses issues like equity. You know, how are you using it to perhaps right some of the wrongs of the past? Is this something that you focus on, that you think about in any way?
Yeah, I'm actually going to sort of take a step back and answer that question, I think, in the bigger context. And then, so, you know, again, as I was saying, one thing actually I really do love about this administration, they are very clear on their priorities, and obviously climate is one. I'd say, if I had to talk about the two that were highest on the list, is climate and equity. And it has been extraordinary for me, because I was at USDOT in the Obama administration and now back again in Biden, to see an administration that essentially, leaves no stone unturned in asking every question about how we take federal dollars, how we run federal programs, how we do rulemakings, how we do everything in the federal government, and putting it through an equity lens. And Gabe mentioned Justice 40, which is an exercise to particularly focus in on something that has, you know, been an important issue in the environmental community. How do we also incorporate environmental justice into everything we're doing? And it has been, I think, extraordinary. We have, I think, been able to literally map out the communities and the parts of the country where we need to direct federal investment. But we've also really been able to engage with those communities. So we're not just showing, like, here we're the federal government, we're here to tell you what you need. We're here to listen to them and talk to them. And that has been part of how we design.
Tell us a little bit what form that takes, actually, Polly. I mean, give us an example.
It's taken a whole bunch of different forms. I would say every part of our administration, from the secretary on down, has, you know, made an effort to travel the country, to go to, you know, perhaps parts of the countries that have not always reaped the benefits of federal investments, of federal contracts, of the jobs that come with those contracts. I've done it myself in a bunch of parts of the country, to sit down and really talk to those communities. And by the way, they don't always tell you what you want to hear. And they don't always tell you what you think they're going to tell you, but really to engage in, we have these programs, we have these dollars, how do we make them work in your community? And one thing we did with all these state plans for NEVI is we required all the states to do that work at the state level and hold their feet to the fire. And look, some of them did it better than others, but we had a standard they had to meet about how they were going to incorporate engagement with disadvantaged communities, again, to talk about what kind of infrastructure they needed, but again, also the contracting opportunities, the job creation communities, the potential EJ impacts, all the spectrum. And we're not just doing that for EV charging, we're doing that across not only all the DOT programs, but all the programs across the federal government. And look, sometimes learning some hard lessons about programs we thought we were running equitably, and discovering there's really some things we need to do. Our eyes are opened in ways we can do things better.
Right.
And just to chime in, I think it's also, and this is how the administration looks at it, it's looking holistically at the whole problem, which sounds a little like a catchphrase, but looking from the standpoint of, yes, where you locate chargers, but again, what are the outcomes that we're going to bring to people? And it's not just about the inner city. It's Indian reservations that have very little access. It's rural towns, right? But then it's also looking at the supply side. And it's saying, well, who's getting the opportunities to work on these things? Holly and I and Deputy Secretary Turk, we had a roundtable yesterday, as you know, and thank you for helping to put that together with, I think, about 10 companies. The two fastest growing companies are owned by African-American millennials, right? And so I think there's huge opportunities for wealth creation, for jobs, and workforce development. And so in the Joint Office, we're doing a lot of technical assistance. We have equity people embedded in every program, and then we're actually looking to hire a chief equity officer, hopefully, next year. But we're also looking like, how do we create opportunities for people to get jobs? Charger Help, which is one of the companies, I think—
Great company, love them. Yeah.
I mean, amazing.
Yeah.
70% of their people are black or brown that are working for them. So, and they're in all 50 states now.
Well, amazing. I'd like to really open this up to a couple questions. Please raise your hand, maybe identify yourself if you have any questions. Otherwise, we'll keep chatting up here. Hillary Norton.
It's a pleasure to see you both. And John, thank you for moderating this great panel. I'm Hillary Norton. I'm one of the California Transportation Commissioners, and we are struggling right now with looking at the new freight network and how quickly we can move it to zero emission. And the opportunity to really meld energy and transportation is so important, and yet in the response and in putting the packages together, we're not really getting a chance to talk about how to work it out together and how to tell the EPA what we think is going to happen and how. How can we be working more closely with you? Because the 710 South is a project of national and regional significance. We want to make it a premier opportunity to showcase how to move to EV and hydrogen. I also want to say, Polly Trottenberg was my graduate school housemate, and so it's just wonderful to see her 30 years later, and she was a stud back then.
It wasn't 30 years, she's lying. Much more recent than that.
I want to hear stories. No, but
That's over drinks tonight.
I know, exactly. I mean, literally, that's our job. So you can come to us. Again, we're the front door. We don't have all the answers in the Joint Office. We're relatively small, though we're expanding and growing if anybody wants to come work with us. But we will connect you, or we will connect the right people within the government so that you can have one conversation instead of 10, right? And then I do want to just mention, because we couldn't do this without the national labs, and I've learned so much about them. There's 17 or 18 of them. They are amazing. And so whether it's a EJ40 map and sort of technical analysis that NREL's built, or, I mean, there's just reliability and standards around EVs for trucking at INL. So we can help connect those dots too for more technical aspects, because you might need that data to make some of the cases, right, to the agencies.
And let me just add, Rumi. So the other thing we're always ready to do, above and beyond EV charging, you know, as has been discussed today, between all our agencies now, we have dozens of programs. We have our Port Infrastructure Development Program, which we're doing a lot of work in port electrification. So, you know, part of what, again, I would say writ large, both for the Joint Office, but at DOT too, the door is open. We have a ton of experts. If you're trying to do complicated things and it might involve 5 different programs and you need a lot of help, please come knock on the door. I'll also make just the pitch Gabe is pitching for people to come work for him. We also need people at DOT. We are hiring. We hired around 300 people this year, and we need to hire another 300.
And actually, we have 6
and this
open
is the best
positions.
time to come.
Well, we have people from DOT that sit in our office, and from DOE and the labs. So there are people that can go work for Polly, and then I'll steal them, and they'll come work for me.
We'll see about that.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
It's just, wow, that just sounds so exciting, really. Is there perhaps one more question? Yes, madam.
Phyllis Chastain. I'm a Boeing retiree. I worked for commercial airlines, and I have a nonprofit now that's focused on community and education. So funding is very critical. But I'm encouraged to understand that the funds are available for government organizations. Private sector, I'm a little bit jaded now that I didn't get results with, I won't name the company. But, so what do you suggest? Do you have resources or research that you can help direct us, smaller? I have a micro enterprise certified small women-owned firm and my nonprofit. So where would you suggest? I partner with large organizations, but for funding, I can't name. What do you suggest? I'm somewhat at a loss and need some encouragement.
Absolutely. Well, you can email me.
There we go.
Yeah. It's gabriel.klein@ee.doe.gov. I said that fast so most of you won't remember it. No, I'm kidding. But seriously, you can email me, and we have a whole group that's working on this issue, on equity and sort of how we make sure that organizations like yours are involved in the process. We work with larger organizations like EV Noir, for instance. They're great, by the way. And so it might be hooking you up with one of these large organizations that may not have a presence in LA or a big presence, right? So we can make those connections as well.
Okay, in closing, maybe we're all kind of transportation nerds in this room, obviously. Perhaps give us a sneak preview of what's in the pipeline of next year in 2023 in terms of some different kind of programs.
Give your pipeline and then
Yeah. Well, first of all, the community grants, I think, for people in this room, they're very interesting. There is a $15 million cap, so depending on what you're doing, it could be, maybe you have a $5 million program, or maybe you have a $40 million program, and this could be 15 million of it, and you need to look at some of the other funding sources and local money. But we want it to be creative, innovative, outcomes-focused. The guidance should come out in the next, couple months by the end of the year, and I think people will be excited about it. The other thing is we are working on our own little mini program within the joint office with some of our operating money. We're working through the processes right now to stimulate some big thinking and innovation around shared mobility. I haven't talked about this anywhere really, so this is sort of breaking news, although it's not really news yet. But the idea is to give urban areas, they could be small, they could be big, the opportunity to test some things around electrified, multimodal.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to hear more. Well, I'll be looking
once
up.
we have the approvals and all that, I can talk more about it. But
I'll give you my email, but you have it already.
Yeah. Well, we want people to, I think government gets held to a very high standard. It's like you have to be successful 100% of the time or you failed. And I think in the private sector, we think you're going to fail probably 70% of the time. And part of our job is to bring those two worlds together and get people to collaborate, understand each other. We do want to allow cities to experiment and try things at a small scale, learn, then they can mitigate the risk before they have a large rollout or contract, right? And we've seen it with different types of pilots over the years, but I think more, let it be federally sanctioned, so it's okay to make mistakes, basically.
Right. Interesting. Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, Polly, Executive Director Klein, Gabe, thank you very much. I know I speak on behalf of all of us here in wishing you the best, and just keep up the good work. It's absolutely inspiring and amazing, and we'll be supporting you every inch of the way. So let's give a big hand for Gabe and Polly. Thank you so much.